everybody. Hopefully you can all hear me coming through to you clearly on Zoom. Welcome to Mars Day. I know it's quite early in the morning, so just take some time to warm up. My name is Gideon. I'm one of the astronomers. Hello, everybody. Hopefully you can all hear me. I'm one of the astronomers at the Zoom. Royal Observatory. Welcome to Mars Day. I know it's... and today we are going to be focusing on moving to Mars, building a Martian habitat. So we are going to spend half of this session just talking about Mars, thinking about the challenges that we would have going to Mars, and building a house and living on Mars. What would that actually entail? Now, hopefully you have some materials with you, some recycled materials just out of your recycling bin. I have my materials behind me, and we'll get to that in the second half of this workshop, where we'll do a little build along and make along together, building a habitat for Mars. And we'll use the knowledge and information that we learn today to do that. So first things first, let's make sure that we're all actually on the same page about which planet we're actually talking about. I'm sure many of you know Mars, but just have a little look at these different planets here. These are some of the planets of the solar system. And just have a little look and see which planet you think is the planet Mars. Now I'm going to give you about 5 seconds. Quickly just have a little look and see which planet you think is Mars. 3, 2, 1. It is, of course, this planet over here. So we have Mercury over here, which is very close to the sun, which means it's very, very hot. So not a terribly good place to try and go and live. Some other people have suggested that we could build bases on Venus. Venus is actually quite similar to planet Earth in size. And we actually think that Venus and the Earth were very similar in the past, but today Venus is a hellish place. Some people refer to it as Earth's evil twin. It's about twice as hot as a kitchen oven on the surface of Venus, because there's lots and lots of air, a thick atmosphere, mostly made of carbon dioxide and ammonia and sulfur dioxide. So it's a very smelly place. It smells like rotten eggs. I definitely wouldn't want to live on Venus. It is actually so hot on Venus that if you left a pizza outside, it would cook in about 9 seconds. So that would be amazing, but it would taste like rotten eggs. So not a place that I would want to live. So Mars is the next place that we will probably send humans out into the solar system to build a habitat. As for the rest of the planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, they do not have a solid surface for us to even stand on. So probably not a great place for us to think about building a Martian habitat. So just to begin with, I would like you all, wherever you are, you might be in a classroom, you might be at home or elsewhere, wherever you are, just take about 10 seconds to close your eyes and really think about the planet Mars. What do you think the planet Mars is like? What's it like to be on the surface? What would it smell like? What would it feel like? Really try to picture yourself standing on Mars and what you already know about the planet. So just take a few more seconds to really think about what Mars might be like looking around. So once you've done that, I would like you all to take a piece of paper, which I have here, if it doesn't want to cut out in the camera. You can see in my build camera, which is pointing down, I have a nice piece of paper here next to my nice planetary cup of coffee. And I would like for us all to begin by just taking a pen. Can be any pen, it can be a pencil, and just drawing a nice circle, and that is going to be the planet Mars. And as we go through the session, we're going to add to this. Every time we see this light bulb on the PowerPoint slides, that's going to be something important to remember about Mars, which will help us with our habitat build. And every time that comes up, we're going to add some information to our drawing down there, and then we can use that later on when we're actually building the habitat. Okay, so has anybody actually seen Mars in the night sky? We can actually see it from London, even though there's lots and lots of city lights, which makes it quite hard to see the stars up in the night sky. But Mars is a planet, which means that it is actually quite a lot closer than the stars. And that means that it's quite brighter in the sky. So have a look at this picture just here. And there are 2 points of light over here. You might have to squint or get a little bit closer. We have a beautiful crescent moon just down here. Which one do you think is Mars in this picture? What do you think Mars would look like in the night sky? Well, I'll give you a clue. Here is Mars. It was the top one. And if you get a little bit closer, if you can, to the screen or squint your eyes, you'll notice that it does have that lovely red color. That's why we call it the red planet, because it looks like a red star in our sky. Now, just for your information, just beneath that is the planet Saturn. We can also see this from the Earth just with our eyes. You don't need a telescope. And that looks like a yellow point of light in the sky. So go out and have a look and see if you can find Mars in our sky over the next few coming months. So I have my first question for you. Do you think Mars is bigger or smaller or the same size as our home planet, the Earth? So have a think. You can shout out, you can tell your friend, tell your teacher, tell your parents. What do we think? Is it the same? Is it bigger or smaller? Well, Mars is actually 2 times smaller than the Earth. It's quite a lot bit smaller than the Earth. And that means that there's less gravity that's pulling you down to the surface of the Earth. So you would actually weigh a lot less on the surface of Mars. If you weighed about 30 kilograms, some of you might weigh that much. I actually, unfortunately, weigh a little bit more than that. But if you weighed 30 kilograms on the surface of Mars, on the surface of the Earth, if you measured yourself here, and then you went to Mars and you measured yourself on Mars, you'd only be about 10 or 11 kilograms. So a very easy way to lose weight. And that means that you can jump about 2 times higher on Mars. And there is Ted, our resident teddy bear astronomer at the Royal Observatory, showing us how to bop around like a kangaroo on the surface of Mars. So that might be something important that we can put on our piece of paper. So we could say that Mars is smaller than the Earth, or we could even say less gravity. And that might be important for our build later on. Okay, wonderful. Hopefully you're all following along okay. So my next question to you is, do you think Mars is hotter, colder, or the same temperature as planet Earth? So have a little think. Again, you can tell your teacher, you can tell your parents, you can tell your friends what you think. Do you think it's hotter, colder, or the same as Earth? This one's a bit of a trick question because when we see pictures like this is a real picture that was taken by the Perseverance rover, which is this rover on Mars, a nice little selfie. We see pictures like this and we think that Mars is a very, very hot place, right? Mars is red, it's the red planet. And just looking at it, it just looks like a desert on the Earth, right? It's kind of like this picture behind me. This is Mars, and it just looks like the Sahara Desert or something. But don't be fooled. Mars is actually a very, very cold place. Now, it doesn't actually look like this. This is an effect I've put on the image, but Mars is about -60 degrees Celsius. That's about as cold as it is in Antarctica. Most humans on the Earth do not live in these conditions. And we can see there Ted shivering a little bit on the cold surface of Mars. So it's a very, very cold place. That's something that we should remember. We should put that down on our pieces of paper because that's going to be very important when it comes to building our habitat. So I'm just going to write very, very cold, and we're going to have to think about how we're going to keep ourselves warm when we're living in our habitats on Mars. So why does Mars look red even though it's really, really cold? And that is a very, very good question. The reason that Mars is red is the same reason that if you leave your bicycle outside in the rain for a few days or a few weeks, or you've seen an old nail or something like that, It's the exact same reason. It is something called rust. Now, rust happens when iron, which is a metal, reacts with oxygen, which on the Earth is a gas. It's the air that we breathe. And when those two atoms, those two elements combine together, they produce this red color, which we know as rust. To the scientists, this is known as iron oxide. So Mars is absolutely covered in iron oxide. Lovely. So Mars looks red to us in the night sky and with our eyes. And when we take pictures of it, it is, of course, this lovely rusty red color. And because it's red, the Romans, who we take the name Mars from, in their mythology, they named it Mars, which is the god of war, because they thought that the red color of Mars signified war. And it's the same for the Greeks. The Greeks came before the Romans, and they named Mars Ares, which is also the god of war. But the Romans later updated that with their mythology. Mars actually has two moons as well that you can see here. They're pretty sorry excuses for moons. They are not like our moon, which is a nice, relatively large ball, a large sphere. Mars's moons are kind of pathetic looking, potato-sized, potato-shaped and relatively small moons, big giant rocks. We don't really know how Mars got these moons. Some people think that these are asteroids, so big pieces of space rocks left over from the formation of our solar system. And these are asteroids that were just floating around. They didn't get made into any planets or anything, and they were captured by the gravity of Mars. Other people are now thinking that these are actually pieces of rock from Mars that were launched up from the surface of Mars as a result of really powerful asteroid impacts on Mars. So we're yet to figure this one out. So we were talking about the temperature of Mars, and why is Mars so much colder? Well, Mars is actually, as you can see, further away from the sun. Here's Mars, here's the Earth. Mars is further away from the sun, and so that means it gets a lot less heat from the sun. So I could describe Mars as being about 140 million miles away, but that doesn't really make much sense. I don't know how to think about that number so large. But we can think about Mars's distance away from us in a different way. Right now, I'm talking into my computer, into Zoom, and that's beaming across the country to all of your homes and all of your schools where you're watching this. And as I speak, my signal is coming through to you pretty much instantaneously. There's not really any delay when I'm talking to you. However, if I or you went to Mars and we were doing this same Zoom call, except one of us was on Earth and one of us was on Mars, it would be very different. And just to exemplify this, to show this, we have Plant over here on planet Earth with Plant's iPhone over there and Ted over here on Mars. And Plant wants to tell Ted a joke. And you're going to realize that telling jokes between the Earth and Mars is going to be a very difficult thing. So Plant will say to Ted, why did the Martian practice his dance moves? And because Mars is so far away, it takes about 15 minutes for that light to travel from the Earth all the way to Ted on Mars. So 15 minutes later, after Plant says, why did the Martian practice his dance moves? Ted will receive that, and Ted will reply, why? And then another 15 minutes later, Plant will receive that message, why? And will deliver the punchline, because he was rusty. And then 15 minutes after that, the punchline would then reach Ted, and Ted would laugh out loud because it's a hilarious joke. Very nice, Plant. So this is one way to just think about how far away Mars is, and just to show you that communication between Earth and Mars would be quite difficult. So this is something that we should remember. Communication. We can write this down on our Mars drawing. We could write communication is slow, or Mars is far from the Earth, very far away.
Mars is so far, it would take about 6 to 9 months or so for us to get there today. So you'd have to make sure that you were very entertained or that you were flying first class to Mars, definitely. So now we're going to play a very quick game called Mars or the Earth. So I would like for you to look at these pictures and hazard a guess. You can speak with your friends or your parents or your teachers and think, which is this? Which planet is this? Is this Mars or is the Earth? The first one is a little bit easy. I'll give you the answer right now. This is, of course, the Earth. The Earth has all of these trees, and look at that moss on the ground, that lovely green moss. Lots and lots of plants. We're very lucky. We live in a giant salad bowl where we can eat our surroundings, all of the vegetables and leaves and plants. On Mars, that is not the case. There are no trees and no plants on Mars. So that is something that we're going to want to remember, because that means that we're going to have to grow our own food, and that may be a little bit difficult. So no plant life on Mars, no food for us to eat in the same way that we can on the Earth. Okay, so we can write that down right there on our piece of paper next to Mars. Okay, here's the next one. Is this Mars or is this the Earth? I'll give you 5 seconds to have a think. This is the Earth. Of course, we can see big bodies of water, rivers and lakes, and then seas over here. There is no or very, very little water on Mars. Mars does, however, have ice, and we will look at that very, very shortly. Of course, in this picture, we can see more trees, more greenery. There is none of that on the surface of Mars. Here is our next question. Is this Mars or the Earth? Have a little guess. And I'll give the answer in 3, 2, 1. This is, of course, Mars. That looks very Martian. This is Olympus Mons. It's the biggest volcano in the solar system, and it makes Mount Everest look absolutely tiny. It's about 4 to 5 times higher than Mount Everest, and it actually pokes up into space. That's how big it is. So very, very large mountain. On Mars, it would be an amazing place to go hiking and have a look of the view of Mars. Okay, we're almost done with the game. Is this Mars or is this Earth? And with this picture, you may be able to see a little image or a little face. This is taken by a satellite that orbits Mars from very far above the surface. And this looks like, to some people, like the face of a teddy bear. And I might make that a little bit easier. There we go. Now, there are no teddy bears on Mars. This just happens to look like a teddy bear when you look from far away. We humans are very good at seeing patterns and faces and things. Okay. This is, of course, Mars. And finally, is this Earth or is this Mars? This one's a bit of a trick question, because this is what we think Mars looked like quite a long time ago, a few billion years ago. We have very good evidence that there is actually liquid water. There was actually liquid water on the surface of Mars. There might have been oceans, rivers, lakes, but today we don't see really any water on the surface of Mars. So this is Mars, but this is what we think Mars may have looked like in the past. So there used to be liquid water, and there may be a little bit of liquid water still in Mars that we may be able to access. And in the words of the Little Prince, who you may be familiar with, just down here, what makes the desert beautiful is that somewhere it hides a well. And that is, or seems likely, the case for Mars. Up here we have the Korolev crater, which is a very large crater that was formed by a piece of space rock crashing into the surface of Mars, carving out a big dome-shaped crater on the surface of Mars, and that filled up with water which froze into ice. So humans on Mars, and we could think about this with our habitat, this will be important, is where should we land and can we get liquid water? So I'm going to write water or ice on my picture, and maybe we can think of something that we could use to get the ice out of the ground and turn it into water, and then we can drink the water and even plant some of our crops. Okay. So one thing that the Earth has that Mars definitely doesn't really have at all is an atmosphere. We've seen all our clouds on the Earth. We're so used to that in the UK. We always see the clouds, but we should be grateful because that is what allows us to stay warm. It holds the heat in, and it protects us from the sun, and of course is the air that we breathe. And the air that we breathe is made by the trees. The trees take in carbon dioxide and they breathe out oxygen, and that helps us to live. As you can see on Mars, though, there is no air, there's no atmosphere. It's a completely barren place. So that's something that we should probably write down on our piece of paper, that there is no air on Mars. That is going to be a problem. Another problem on Mars is there's lots of dust. So you can see in the picture on the right, that there's a picture of Mars here, and there's not really any dust. It's very nice and clear. But then the same picture here of Mars covered in a dust storm. So there are storms on Mars that completely cover the entire surface of the planet. And could you imagine if there was a storm on the Earth that engulfed the entire Earth? I don't think we've ever seen that really before. So this is a big problem. There's lots of dust. Now, it's easy to think that this would be a really crazy, windy hurricane storm that we're used to on the Earth. But because there's not really any air on Mars, a really, really strong wind on Mars would just feel like just like a light breeze on the planet Earth. So we wouldn't necessarily have to worry too much about things being blown over, but definitely we'll have to worry about things being covered in dust. So we should write down very dusty. Mars is a very dusty place. And because there's no atmosphere, the light from the sun actually makes the dust on Mars really, really sticky. So here is the Opportunity rover. This is one of the rovers that is on Mars, but is no longer functional. It doesn't work anymore because the solar panels, which we can see in the picture on the right, they were completely covered by dust in a dust storm. And this dust sticks to the solar panels. And it sticks to the solar panels in the same way that when you take a balloon, you blow up a balloon and you rub it on your hair. I don't really have any hair, but imagine if I had hair where you could rub it on your jumper and it would make the balloon really sticky. You could then stick it to walls, or sometimes it picks up people's hair. That's called static electricity. And it's very similar for the dust on Mars. And you would end up looking like this very unhappy cat covered in styrofoam sticky balls. So we've sent many things to Mars, rovers, satellites, and it's only the next step that we send humans to Mars. So we are very quickly running out of time. We are going to go to Mars. We're going to become Martian architects, and we are going to start building our Martian habitat. So we should have all of this information on our pieces of paper just down here. And I'm going to remove this so that I can show you some of the materials that I have. But just to recap quickly, the challenges we're going to have to consider is that Mars is very cold. There's no air to breathe on Mars, so we're going to have to think about how we're going to keep our habitat secure, how we're going to keep it warm, how we're going to protect ourselves from the sun's radiation, also how we're going to protect ourselves from the dust, of course, how we're going to grow plant life, and how are we going to explore the Martian surface, because there's so much to explore, we're going to need a rover. The first thing I would like you to think about is, Mars is very far from the Earth, as we just learned, and it may be quite a lonely place to be. And you might want a taste of home. You might want something that reminds you of home. So I would first like us all to think about 3 objects that you just couldn't live without. 3 things that you'd want to take to Mars, and maybe think about things that are light, because it is very difficult to put things on a rocket ship and send them to Mars. And finally, here's a little bit of inspiration. Some of these pictures are houses or habitats for Mars that have won awards. And here's a glass dome. You can see many of these are round shaped because rounder shapes are more strong. They're stronger than a square box, for example. That's why we are going to use bottles and round things. You can also see down here that they've actually buried their habitat underneath the Martian soil, which is great for protection from the sun. It would keep you warm as well. So that's another thing we could think about doing. So I propose a very simple build, because we're not going to have time to really finish this all together. We only have a few minutes left, actually. But we have a couple of bottles that you can see here in my top-down camera. This is just an old bottle. And I'm going to use one bottle for a greenhouse and another bottle for the main habitat over here. So hopefully you have some bottles. They don't have to be exactly the same. Some of you may have also brought a milk carton, which is also absolutely fine. That's got round edges, so it's nice and secure. And later on, with an adult's help, or if you're capable of doing it on your own, that's great. We can actually cut our bottles or our milk cartons open, and that way we can use these as a hatch, and we can place our objects inside. So you can see on all of my bottles, I've actually found a way to cut these bottles open. Here you can see the bottles open. This serves as a kind of latch or a door that we can open and close. And that's important because we're going to want to put things inside of our bottles. So this is not the first thing you have to do. It can be hard to cut a plastic bottle, and always be careful about the sharp edges of the plastic bottle. So this I would recommend that you do with the help of an adult after we finish the call. I really encourage you to continue your build after we finish the call, and really just let your imagination and your creativity go wild. You don't have to build the exact same thing that I've got here. You may not even have the same materials, which is absolutely fine. So I just have two bottles, or one bottle and a milk carton, and we're going to think about how to connect these a little bit later. Something else that will be important for our build is how we're going to get energy. Now, I've built these little solar panels just using some cardboard, and I've just drawn in some of the patterns of a solar panel. So we can take our pens, we have nice colored pens over here, and we can color in and draw our own solar panels. Let me get it under the camera. And we can even put the solar panel together so that it can move, and that way we could actually have a mechanism or a way that we could brush the dust off of our solar panels. And all I've done is I've used a plastic cup. You might have a paper cup or a toilet roll, or anything will do really. You can go crazy. And I've cut a strip of cardboard over here and just folded it in half, and I've stuck it to the solar panel, and that way it's secure and tied to the plastic cup over here. And we have a nice piece of cardboard that we can combine with our loo rolls that we can use to make our Martian rover. So the loo rolls will act as wheels. There we go. We can drive this around. And I would love for you to go absolutely crazy and design your Martian rovers just like this. You can draw all over it. And if you want to go even more extra, you may have brought something like bubble wrap or something like this that we can use to actually wrap our habitats in, and that will serve as a lovely piece of insulation and protection. And remember, we want to keep warm on the surface of Mars. Now, finally, what's very important, of course, is our greenhouse, is our trees. So one of these bottles I'm going to use as a greenhouse, which will let sunlight in. And I'm going to place my trees in, which I've simply just drawn on a piece of cardboard, and I've colored them in, as you can just see here. This is a nice little tree. And that will be something that you will be able to place in, close the hatch. And here we have a lovely little Martian greenhouse, and we can keep adding to this as much as we want as we go along. Now, you can think of different plants that would work well on Mars. Strawberries are something that scientists are thinking that could grow well on Mars, but there's also things like sweet potato, spinach leaves. So think about what kind of food you might want to grow on Mars, and give it a draw. You can put it into your greenhouse over here, and later on we are going to connect our greenhouse just using some loo roll over here to the rest of our habitat. So really use your imagination. Some of the bottles have lids, and those can act as different doors and hatches that we can connect different sized toilet roll to. As you can see here, this toilet roll could just fit around the outside of this bottle, which is very, very helpful. And then what we could do is connect the two toilet rolls together, either just using tape, or if we want to be a bit more creative, we can do what I've done here with this example with a plastic cup. And I've essentially just taken one piece of loo roll and I've put it on top of the cup just like that. And I drew a circle around where the loo roll is. And then I took my scissors and cut it out.
They wrap up, we'll get it.
And this way I can put this in and it will be completely sealed, because remember, we want to prevent any dust or any cold air going into our habitats over here. Okay, so this is a great way that we could actually connect our two habitat bases. So we could cut a hole in this loo roll over here, and we can stick this loo roll in, and then these will be completely well connected. Now this is going to be my main habitat over here, and this is where I'm actually going to put the items that I really wanted to bring. So the items that I really want to bring to Mars to keep me entertained, as you can see on my PowerPoint slide, are a camera, a guitar, and a little photo album to remind me of my friends and family on planet Earth. Okay, so these are three things that I really recommend just having a think about what you would love to build, what would you love to bring, pardon me, to Mars to keep you entertained. Now, at this point, if you have any questions or anything like that, we are coming towards the tail end of the workshop. So please do send in any questions that you might have, and I'll try to be updated and answer as many of those as I can. So feel free to send any questions. I would really love for you to just let your imaginations go crazy. If you have coloring pencils or colored paper, I have orange colored paper here, then we could even later on think about covering our Martian habitats underneath the Martian soil, just like this. We can draw on our orange paper, because remember that Mars is very cold and there's lots and lots of high energy light that's coming from the sun. And so the Martian soil, or as scientists call it, the regolith, will be very, very strong in protecting us. So this could be something that you do at the end, once you've built all of your habitats and all your bottles. But I'm just going to go ahead and start taking a random piece of cardboard, if you have any scrap cardboard or any scrap paper, just like this. And I'm going to start just drawing a camera. That's probably the first thing that I would take. That's something that would be really amazing. Imagine that you could send pictures back to the Earth. And if you're curious about how you might send pictures back to the Earth, then you could also go ahead and make a lovely little satellite dish, which is what I've got here.
There are questions in the Q&A panel.
Great. This is very simple, just a plastic cup and two pieces of cardboard, one rolled up. So if there are any questions, I am very much ready to answer any with the Q&A. I will just check to see if there are any questions that have come through. Okay, we have a question from Freya, 6 years old, home ed. Hello, Freya. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope that you've enjoyed watching and following along. That's a great question. Could animals go to Mars? Now, I wonder what motivated you to ask this question. Maybe you're thinking, could I have any chicken to eat on the surface of Mars? I suppose we don't really know. We think that animals definitely could go to Mars because, you know, humans, we are animals, and they would need probably quite similar things that we do. They would need shelter, they would need warmth, they would need air and oxygen. So if you want to bring your pet to Mars, that's absolutely fine. You could bring, you know, a little dog. We have sent animals to space, monkeys and dogs and all kinds of different animals, spiders. That might be a great way to have some company, to have some friends, some furry friends on Mars. That's a really, really great question. So anyone with any pets, yes, feel free to bring your pets to Mars. That would be quite a surreal, quite a strange thing for your pets to experience. Can you please share the steps of the project that you are doing? Yes, absolutely. Well, this project really, if you just have a look at this image, hopefully you all would have received the handout that was sent out. It does contain this image. And this is really just the entire project that we're building as a base. And then you can use your imagination and use the things that we've learned today to really start to enhance it, to personalize it, and to really make it your own. So I really recommend just spending a little bit more time after this call and you know, having a go, seeing how creative you can be and how cool you can make your Mars habitat. I hope that helped. Okay, let's have a look. If there are no loos, what would you do? Year 2 question. That's a very good question. There aren't any loos on Mars. We would have to build one. So that might be something that you want to add to your habitat. You might also want to build a bed and other things like that. But yes, a toilet. Actually, there's an interesting thing we could use it for because the Martian soil doesn't really have any nutrients. There's nothing in the soil that we could use to grow plants and trees and things. What we could actually do is use our poo to fertilize the ground. And we could actually use our poo in the same way that on farms we use horse poo and other animals to actually give some nutrients into the ground. We could actually perhaps figure out a way to use our own waste to help us grow food. So that's a really good question, and definitely something to think about a little bit more. Okay, let's see. Oh my gosh, there are so many great questions. What is the white part on the planet? We covered that a little bit. The white parts on the planets, Mars also has polar ice caps. So if you think about the Earth has the North Pole and the South Pole. On the North Pole, we have the Arctic, and on the South Pole, we have the Antarctica. So Mars has a very similar thing. It has ice caps on the 2 poles. Some of that ice is made of water ice, and some of that ice is made from carbon dioxide ice. So there is ice on the planet of Mars. And as you saw, in some craters, there's also ice that is water that has frozen into ice and has covered up those craters. So very, very good question, the white part. And that might be very helpful for us to actually get liquid water in order to drink. What happened to the magnetic field of Mars? Okay, that's a very, very good question. Now, I didn't actually mention that, but I'm glad you brought that up. So not only does Mars not have really an atmosphere, it doesn't really have air, Mars also doesn't have a magnetic field. And the Earth has a magnetic field. The Earth is like a giant magnet. In the center of the Earth, there is iron, which is swirling around, and that causes a magnetic field. And that magnetic field goes out into space, and that actually kind of pushes away a lot of the high energy light that comes from the sun. And around the North Pole and around the South Pole, perhaps some of you have seen this with your eyes, or maybe you've seen pictures, we actually get aurora, so the northern lights and the southern lights, where the atmosphere lights up in all these colors. And that's because the magnetic field of the Earth has really just redirected some of that high energy light into the North and South Pole. And when that hits the air in our atmosphere, it creates all those wonderful, lovely colors. So the Earth has a magnetic field because it has this magnet inside of it. Mars, we don't really know what happened to the magnetic field of Mars, but we know that Mars doesn't really have one. And that is not really good news for us, because that means that there isn't really any protection from the radiation from the sun. So that could also be something creative that you can think about. How would you actually protect us if there is no magnetic field on Mars? Could we make our own magnetic field? Is there any kind of technology that you could think of, or anything new that we don't do on the Earth that you could use to protect you on the surface of Mars? That's a very, very good question. We don't really know what happened to magnetic fields of Mars, but we know that the inside of Mars is not the same as the Earth, and that's why it doesn't have one. We know that Mars is also smaller than the Earth, and so it had less gravity to hold on to its atmosphere. And if there's no magnetic field, then the sun's radiation will just bombard the atmosphere that used to be there, and eventually that will push all of the gas away from Mars. Very, very, very good question. I'm just seeing, was Mars formed by a collision? We don't think so. I don't think there's any evidence to show that Mars was formed by a collision. It's possible that Mars's moons, Phobos and Deimos, that they were formed by a collision with Mars. Maybe they are made up of Mars rock that was launched up into space and collided with Mars, and now it has those moons. But we don't think that Mars was formed by a collision. Very good question. Why is a Mars year shorter than an Earth year? From Moyle Primary School. That's a great question. A Mars year is actually a lot longer than an Earth year. It's about twice as long, actually. So on Earth, our year is about 365 and a quarter days. I'm sure you all know. On Mars, it's more like 687 days or so. So it's about twice as long on Mars. So if you were born on Mars, you would be half the number of years, Earth years, as you are now. So I would be about 15, which I don't know how I feel about that. I don't know if I would want to be 15 again, but hey, if I was on Mars, I would be 15. And if you're 10, then you would be 5 on Mars. If you're 5, you'd be about 2.5. So the years on Mars are longer. Interestingly, though, the days on Mars, so how long it takes for Mars to spin once on its axis, on the Earth, that takes about 24 hours. On Mars, it's about the same. It's about 24.5 hours or so. So a daytime on Mars, a day, would be really quite similar to one on the Earth. Very good question. Let's see. Can you only grow food in a greenhouse? That's a very good question. Yes, because there's no air on Mars, because there is lots of high intensity radiation coming from the sun, and because there's not really any nutrients or water in the soil, we can't grow food outside on Mars as it is. So that's a shame. That makes things quite challenging. And that's why we have our greenhouses. So we use greenhouses on planet Earth to grow food, and we'll have to do the exact same thing on Mars. We will have to use a greenhouse as well. Very good question. These are really great questions. Thanks so much for sending these in. Let's have a look. How many hours of light is there in a day on Mars? I just answered that. That's about the same time as the Earth. One full day is about 24.5 hours or so on Mars, which is really good. We wouldn't have to change our normal routine. We could go to bed at around the same time. We wouldn't feel any really kind of jet lag as you might feel if you go to different places on the Earth. It would be a very similar day. That would be quite easy. Is Antarctica hotter than Mars? Fantastic. So I said that Mars is about -60 degrees Celsius, which is absolutely freezing. that is just the average temperature. Mars on the equator in the middle of summertime is about 20 degrees Celsius or so. So that's actually quite nice. The weird thing about Mars, though, is that because the air is so thin, it might be 20 degrees at your feet on Mars, but then as you get higher and higher up to your head, it would be about 0 degrees at your head because there's just barely any air to hold any of the heat in. So that's really quite strange. You definitely want to wear a spacesuit. In some of the colder parts of Mars and some of the colder parts of the year, the temperature can go even lower. It can go to about minus 140 degrees Celsius or so. So I don't think there's anywhere on the surface of the Earth that gets that cold. And that would be, a real challenge. So we really have to think about insulating our habitats, making sure that they're warm, making sure that we actually have a spacesuit that keeps us warm as well. There are so many good questions here. I really don't know if I can get to all of these in the time that we have. How do we know that Mars smells like rotten eggs if we haven't been there? So Mars probably doesn't really smell of much because you need air to carry the smell molecules for you to breathe in. It's the same reason why we don't really think space smells of much, because there's not really any air for you to breathe in to actually carry a smell. It's actually Venus that we think smells of rotten eggs. And that's because there's lots of sulfuric acid and sulfur, which is an element in the periodic table, one of the elements. And on the Earth, I've been to several different places on the Earth. For example, places like the Dead Sea, or areas where there are really salty pools or kind of hot springs, if you've ever been to one of those. Usually you find, or sometimes you find a lot of sulfur in the water, and that really gives off a horrible rotten egg kind of smell. And so we would think that Venus would probably have some kind of smell of rotten eggs. I don't think it would smell terribly well, terribly good. So very good question. That is Venus that will be more smelly. So thankfully on Mars, we don't have to worry too much about any bad smells. Anonymous question, was there a river on Mars? Fantastic question. We think that billions of years ago, when the Earth was very young, before humans had evolved, even before the dinosaurs, long before the dinosaurs, we think that Mars had water. We think maybe that there were rivers. We can see pictures. You can go on Google, go on the NASA website or the European Space Agency website, and you can actually see pictures from Mars that really, they look like places on the Earth where water flows. You can see riverbeds, ancient riverbeds. You can see areas where there must have been seas, maybe oceans, and areas where the rivers come and meet the sea. So we definitely see a lot of evidence that there used to be water on Mars. I think now that that's the general understanding, is that there used to be water on Mars. That's a very good question. Today, we think there's a very small amount of actual liquid water on Mars. That's the gold stuff. That's what we need. We need liquid water. That's what we need to survive. And that's what plants need to grow. But we can, of course, melt some of the ice into liquid water and use that. That's a fantastic question. Let's see if I have missed anything. Here we go. Why does Mars have dust storms? That's a fantastic question. We know that Mars does have dust storms. We know that Mars has dust storms that cover the entire planet, which is absolutely crazy. I suppose it's a similar mechanism that's happening on the Earth, and that is that Mars also has seasons. So there are periods of Mars on different areas on the surface that will receive more sunlight, and that can heat up some of the air that there is on Mars, the very little amount of air that there is. It can also heat up the ground of Mars, the surface of Mars. And as you heat something up, when you heat air up, hot air likes to rise, air likes to move. And so when you have enough heat and enough air that's a little bit warmer than the air around it, then you start to get this movement of air. And that's essentially what we just call wind or a storm. And so if you have this heating of Mars that happens enough air gets heated up, then that will start to move, and we might think of that as wind. And as it moves, because there's so much fine dust on Mars, the dust is actually light enough to be picked up by that wind and be carried across the entire surface of Mars. So it's a really interesting thing that we see happening on Mars. And that is certainly going to be it will be a challenge for any humans that are on Mars. And of course, we're building a habitat on Mars. We're really going to have to think about how we are going to prevent all of that dust getting inside in our suits, and you certainly don't want to breathe it in. It's the same thing, by the way, on the moon. The moon has really fine dust, although there are no storms on the moon. So we don't see any wind, there's no atmosphere, there's no wind on the moon. So I think I may have reached most of the questions. Just double check that I haven't missed any questions. Does Mars have electricity? There is no electricity currently on Mars. The only electricity I can think of is what I mentioned before with the dust. So the dust becomes really sticky from static electricity, and that starts to stick to all of our clothes. And so that's really the only kind of electricity I can think of on Mars, but we are going to have to make our own. And that's a challenge that I put out to you. How are we going to make our own electricity? Well, one of the ideas we had was using a solar panel over here. That's how many of the rovers on Mars get their electricity. But there are many other ways we could do it. We could use nuclear energy. We can use all different kinds of forms of energy. So that's a really good challenge for you to think about how you might generate electricity. And then we could power our Wi-Fi and our internet and all those important things that we need. Let's see, how can you generate heat? That will be a similar process. We could use the electricity from the solar panels to generate heat. We could generate heat in similar ways that we do on the Earth. You could imagine radiators or hot air heaters or something like that. So another design challenge for you to think about when you're building your habitat. How are you going to keep us warm? Using the bubble wrap, which I mentioned over here, bubble wrap has little pockets of air, and those pockets of air will actually hold in heat and keep things warm. So we can also wrap our habitats in an insulating material, very much the same thing that we do here on planet Earth. That will help us to stay warm. Okay, let's see. Are there any other questions? Is there anything that I have missed? Why is Mars red? Again, that's about the rust. There's iron in the ground. There was oxygen in the air, and those two came together and they combined. And when they combine, they cause rust. They look red. And it's the same reason that we have red blood. We have iron in our blood. And of course, we're breathing in oxygen, and those two are combining, and our blood starts to turn a little bit red. Fantastic. So I think I have answered most of the questions, all of the questions that are in the Q&A chat. If there are any other questions, please feel free to throw them into the chat. Hopefully, I really hope I've answered your questions to their fullest, and that you have a much better understanding of Mars. Hopefully you're all going okay with your build. So we have our satellite dish here. These are just made simply of cardboard. And again, remember, we want to think of our 3 objects. So my object will include, of course, my camera, because I'm going to want to take lots of pictures of Mars and send them home to my friends. Here it is. Not the best drawing of a camera. We could just cut that out. There we go. Nice and easy, just out of cardboard or paper or anything like that. And once we have our habitat, I am just going to pop that inside. There we go, and we can still see through the plastic bottle. Wonderful. Just put my pen so it doesn't slip. Fantastic. Okay, another thing that I would really like to bring to Mars is a little photo album. So I'm going to take another piece of cardboard. Photo album. Because I would love to have a reminder of all of my friends, and all of my families will be quite far away on Mars. So I would just love to remember everybody that I love here on planet Earth. And of course, finally, I personally, you can ask my friends and my family, I cannot live without my guitar. So I'm going to take another piece of cardboard and just with a pen, quite simply draw a little guitar. There we go. This is going to be a classical guitar, but you could draw an electric guitar, you could draw anything you like. But just important to think about what it is that you would love to bring to Mars. Some of you maybe want to bring a pet, like we mentioned earlier. Some of you may have a TV or a PlayStation or an Xbox or something like that that you might want to bring. Perhaps you have a book or something like that. Something that you will keep you entertained and will keep you happy while you're on Mars. Here we go. I've just cut out a little guitar over here, and I'm going to pop that into my house over here. Now, remember we said that there were different types of plants that might grow well on Mars. You can think about your own food that you really like to eat. But we know that sweet potatoes are probably quite good. They don't take too much water. Spinach leaves, and of course, strawberries would be lovely. There's been some recent research that suggests that maybe strawberries would be a really good thing to bring to Mars. So I'm going to draw a simple strawberry there. And I'll take my red pen and we can just color it in just like that. There is a lovely looking strawberry. We could then take a green pen. We could make some little leaves just like that. And this is something that I'm going to add into my greenhouse over here. Here is some fruit, and that would be really nice to eat later on for dinner or for dessert. Fantastic. So hopefully everyone's doing well. I'll just check that there aren't any more questions. Oh yes, okay, lovely. Wow, so many more questions. We probably only have time for maybe one more question, I think. So how did you get this job and what did you study? Hopefully the stream is still going.
You're okay.
All right, so how did you get this job and what did you study? I would just really love to answer that because I would really love to encourage you to, go into the world of science, and especially go into the world of science communication. It's something I've always been interested in science. I actually only studied astronomy for 1 year. My main degree was in human physiology and biology. So I was really interested more in living things, actually. When I was at university, I studied biology, and I took as many opportunities as I could to learn more about astronomy and about space. I joined local astronomy societies. I went to the observatory in Greenwich, which is where I now work. And I always tried to find ways to, nurture my interest in astronomy, really kind of take as many opportunities as I could to immerse myself or go a little bit deeper in the field of astronomy and in science communication. I ended up making some documentary films and videos, and I found that a really, really interesting way to communicate science. And later on, I ended up working in observatories in Australia and in New Zealand, in the middle of the countryside where you can actually see the stars. And that was probably the first time I ever saw a really, really clear night sky. And I think probably for everybody that changes their life in some way. It made me feel really connected to space science and astronomy. And so, I just essentially, I think the main point is just to be open to any opportunity and really just follow your interests. If you're really interested in something and you keep your ears open for any opportunities, if there's museums or if there are exhibitions or different places you can go to learn more and more and more, then over time you'll find that you develop your own understanding of things. You start to get better at talking to people about things and teaching and explaining. And I think the beautiful thing about science communication is that you can enter it from many, many different areas. And I would say the same thing about astronomy. I entered it from a biological pathway. I was very interested in how humans might live in space, what space does to the body, and also how we might find life or even grow life on other places. That's an area called astrobiology, which is a really, really fascinating area of science. Do I think humans will ever live on Mars? Some humans who will go unnamed think that humans will be on Mars relatively soon, the 2030s to the 2050s. I do believe that humans will live on Mars at some point. But as you've seen today, there are many, many challenges to living on Mars. So at first, it will start off as a pretty short-term habitation. And then that will slowly start to grow, I'm sure, to a longer term. I think probably humans will go to the moon first and establish a moon habitat first, because then we could actually just fly from the moon to Mars and back, and that would be not as long a trip as from the Earth to Mars. So, on the moon, we might build like a service station with a McDonald's or something. I really hope not. But you could imagine that the moon would be a stopping point to Mars. So I would love to go to Mars at some point in my lifetime, if that's possible. And it would be an amazing thing in the future if humans do end up living on Mars. What do you think? Do you think humans will live on Mars? I'd love to know what you think about that question. Why is Mars considered the most Earth-like planet? William,
no more questions.
William, thank you so much for sending in that question. That's absolutely wonderful. So Mars is not exactly considered the most Earth-like in a way. We've just seen that Mars is not a very nice place. It's not really that similar to the Earth. There's not really much air to breathe. There's lots of radiation from the sun. There's no water. There's no plants. So in many ways, it's really not that similar to the Earth. But when we think about moving to Mars, I don't think we think about it as being, the exact same place as the Earth. Some people, maybe you've heard about this, it's called terraforming. Some people have thought of this idea of completely changing the environment on Mars. So creating an Earth-like environment on Mars, that means having an atmosphere and having liquid water. But that is a process that would probably take thousands of years. We don't have the technology to do that now. Maybe in the future, that would be the case. But we look at Mars and we think that, okay, it's not like Venus where it's just way too hot and you really, really can't do much. Even metal melts on Venus, and it's a smelly place, remember? But Mars, we think of as, being a rocky planet, so that somewhere we can sit on, somewhere we can build a base on, stand on. And there's a very thin atmosphere. There's some ice. There's some evidence that maybe there used to even be life on Mars. So Mars represents, or Mars is just a very interesting place that we've been interested in Mars for a very long time. But more recently, we're more interested in if there's any life on Mars, or if there was life on Mars. We're still not sure about that question. And also, this is an amazing way for us to develop our technology, for us to, and this includes you all listening, to think outside the box and think about how we could do things that are more efficient, more sustainable, and, would really make technology advance by thinking about all of these difficult problems of living on Mars. So that's a really fantastic question.
Finish the stream now. That's the end.
Does Mars get lots of meteorites hitting the surface? Would it possibly hit the habitat? Yes. Fantastic question. Mars does get lots of meteorites hitting the surface. Some of the rovers that are on Mars have taken pictures of meteorites on the surface of Mars because they look very different to the rocks that are on Mars. So we do know that meteorites hit Mars. We can see that Mars is covered in all of these impact craters. They kind of look like pimples that you find on your face. We see those all over Mars. And that's because there are rocks from space that are crashing down and hitting Mars. And remember, there's not really much air on Mars. And so the reason we don't get meteorites hitting the Earth all the time, or the surface of the Earth anyway, is because the air of our atmosphere slows the meteor down, and the meteor just burns up in the atmosphere, and we don't actually feel anything really hitting the surface of the Earth. That happens somewhat occasionally, but it's rare to have a big asteroid hitting the Earth. Mars is different. There's not really much air to slow down any meteors. So if there is a space rock that's coming towards Mars, the chances are it's going to get through and hit the surface. So again, that's a very good, very, very good question. And it's a good point that we should think about how are we going to protect our habitats from space rocks hitting them. That's going to be quite a little bit difficult. So we could think about strong structures, but again, I think maybe a really cool idea is to think about burying our habitats underground. And that way, the soil, or the regolith, as scientists call it, of Mars acts as a protective layer. That means we don't have to bring anything, we don't have to really build anything. We can just use the surface of Mars itself to protect us. So a really fantastic question. Wow, a few questions from Alicante, Spain. Wow. Here we go. Are there clouds in Mars? What could happen if so? Can humans grow plants using Mars sand? Thanks. Okay. Bienvenidos from Alicante. Lovely to have you. So we do see very thin clouds on Mars, very high up in the atmosphere, but they're really thin. We don't really see too many of those. Again, because there's not really much air, and certainly not a lot of water vapor in the atmosphere. Our clouds on the Earth are made of water vapor. That's because there's lots of it on the Earth. There's barely any on Mars, so we really don't see many clouds on the surface of Mars or in the skies of Mars. What could happen if so? Well, if we were to terraform Mars, if we were going to try to create the environment and atmosphere on Mars that we have on the Earth, then we would have clouds, and that would give us an entire water cycle, hopefully. So water would evaporate from the ground into the air, and that would rain down elsewhere on Mars, just like we have here on the Earth. The clouds will also act as a little bit of protection from the sun as well. So clouds on Mars is a good thing. I know we're sick of clouds in London. Clouds on Mars would be a good thing. Can humans grow plants using sand? Using Mars sand?
Gideon, we need to wrap this up.
Okay, we'll wrap this up after this question. We cannot use Mars sand, unfortunately, to grow any food on Mars. There isn't any nutrients in the Mars sand, and it's actually a little bit toxic. So we're going to have to do some interesting science to filter out some of that soil and make it clean. So muchas gracias for the questions from Alicante, and thank you all so much for the questions that have come in from across the country, from schools. I really hope that you enjoyed this kind of build along moving to Mars workshop with me, Gideon from the Royal Observatory. Have yourselves a fantastic time building your own habitats. Hopefully you've all learned interesting things today about Mars, and I'm sure you will continue to do so for the rest of the Mars Day celebration. So again, thank you so much for having me. Thanks for tuning in. And I very much look forward to seeing what kinds of things you can build. So thanks very much.